Welcome back to Stasis, and this is going to be a bizarre part. Because we're going to see quite a few unusual things. But first of all, there are three different areas we can go to, three different lab areas. And let's just head over to the left first.
This is ridiculous. How did it grow this wild in a few months? These plants can't naturally develop this fast.
Kane developed the technology to accelerate plant growth. Oxygen is big business.
Remember that point about the oxygen for later. Now, if you remember from the last part, the entire point of this is Taya said there's a service elevator we can use to get further into the bowels of the ship somewhere in here. But the problem is everything is overgrown with plants. And as you might have guessed, we'll eventually have to do something about that. But for now, there's a metal plaque at the corner of this screen that we can pick up. It's not as simple to recognize because it doesn't have that kind of a shine effect to it that many things you can interact with do. I just kind of moused over it at random when I was just looking at everything in this room. For now, though, there are a couple of computer terminals here, and this one is for Dr. Sebastian Gray, who's egotistical. Dr. Gray does research on plants and insects, and this PDA starts with the revelation that his section has been expanded, so there's more staff, more interns working for him, and he doesn't particularly like that because they don't contribute much, they just kind of follow orders, but they do it without the kind of unquestioning loyalty of, say, workers in a colony to a queen. Speaking of, there is a queen. The queen is part of Project Kitchen Knife, and it takes a bite out of one of his interns, and he has to attend an accident debriefing, although he reveals that Dr. Milan seems to like testing him. He thinks the queen lashed out because some of her insect eggs didn't hatch properly. Those insects which are hatching are also part of his project, and he eventually turns over the queen and all the responsibilities associated with it to a girl named Akiza Tenshu. And her great-great-grandfather was the driving force behind the eugenics wars, and it's a tremendous shame on her family. Soon those insects he's helping breed start to become restless, and he blames it on the armed guards that are starting to show up more often around the Groom Lake. He gets one of them dismissed, but over time, two of his interns disappear, and no one knows where they went. The production of the Queen's quote-unquote royal jelly slows to a crawl, but then they find a strange fungus on the growth pods. What makes this fungus unusual is that it harbors baseline neural activity. It's intelligent in some form. So of course he thinks it's a good idea to have his team cultivate more of it. He performs some experiments with the fungus, which other people aren't supposed to know about, and he particularly cites one involving a monkey, where it's revealed that the fungus takes control of the nervous system and various parts of the brain of whatever it infects. Because the monkey at first was thrashing around, it was really angry and aggressive, and then as the fungus took hold, it became really calm, really quiet, really observant, and surprisingly intelligent. Just over a month later, the experiments break containment and wind up taking over basically all of hydroponics. The fungus spreads and infects all of his staff members, and he says that, much to his shame, he watched them die and then examined their bodies. He mentions that the insects he was cultivating earlier have grown into a swarm that nobody can pass through, and he cites one particular person, Solomon, who tried crossing through them while wearing a rad suit, and the insects tore it off his body and then stung him to death. He clings to the rather vain hope that they will recognize him as their creator and not brutally kill him. Finally, there are two emails on his PDA, one from Akiza Tenshu, basically saying, "Stop talking about my family, I don't want to go into it," and another from a doctor named Eleanor Way, who seems to be buttering him up to try and get information out of him about a certain kind of cargo that she's not supposed to know about, apparently. Now then, We aren't going to go through that door on the left anytime soon, because, well, it's locked. And we're not going to touch the computer terminal yet. That terminal is tied to the vaporizer pad, which we will eventually use, but not yet. For now, though, let's continue establishing the lay of the land in hydroponics, and head through the door to the upper right, and, oh god.
Are you fucking kidding me?
What?
It's some sort of insect.
Keep your distance.
It's tied up. Doesn't look like it can get loose.
Tied up. How big is it?
This is the queen, and those things on it are suction cups which milk it, and the milk... I need to take my mind off of this for a moment, so let's go to the computer terminal and let's do some light reading. Remember how Akiza Tenshu was put in charge of the queen? Well, these are her personal data logs. She starts with the news that Dr. Gray made her personally responsible for the nursery and the queen, and talks about how the royal jelly itself not just has nutritional value for its insect population, but that it accelerates molecular bonding for substances, makes it thicker, enhances its natural properties, and that there could be huge medical breakthroughs with this stuff. She mentions how growing up her parents used to keep bees, so she's used to being around insects, but the queen seems unusually friendly to her in particular. It's also rather docile while it's being milked, but to her in particular it seems rather friendly. There's another doctor, Dr. Mirik, who wants to see how the milk can affect tree resins for the purpose of creating industrial adhesives. That's why there are cables extending from the milk tank to a nearby tree. Not sure if you caught that before I pulled up this PDA. Eventually she starts hearing things, particularly when she's working night shifts or she's trying to sleep. It sounds like there are children on the ship who are in pain, who are crying out in despair. And she talks to one of the onboard doctors about it, who prescribes her something, but at the same time, he looks like he knows what she's talking about and is also questioning what it is. Even Dr. Gray doesn't want to talk about it. She reaches the point where Dr. Gray puts her in charge of examining that new fungus, and she thinks that they should just destroy it, but of course Dr. Gray wants to examine it and breed it. More time passes, and people are refusing to show up for work. Even worse, she witnesses Edmund, one of her research assistants, get pulled through the air duct by some thing. And it dawns on her that maybe that's what happened to the two interns who just disappeared. She resolves to resign from her post, but she doesn't do it and ends up regretting it. The insects attack and end up killing Dr. Gray, and Akiza also realizes the fungus is growing over her, it's burrowing into her skin, it's starting to take over her body. Before that, she manages to use an emergency flare to keep the bugs away so that the people who aren't infected have a chance to escape. Then presumably the fungus takes over because she mentions her head feels funny and she thinks she can feel it growing through her ear canal. There were two emails on here, one from Dr. Gray, who typos her name and calls her Azika instead of Akiza, saying she and the other interns should stop pulling pranks at work, namely running around in front of the queen screaming, "I'm covered in bees." She also has an email from Dr. Eleanor Way, who it turns out is rather religious. And Akiza was asking her about the sounds that she was hearing at night, and basically asked her if she believed in ghosts. Eleanor tries to reassure her that it's not ghosts, it's just various devices on the ship making noises. Anyway, there's something else that we can do with this computer terminal, and it has to do with the milk processor. Now, Akiza's personal logs were on this computer, but there's also the Queen Shaver controls. And in particular, it shows her activity each day of the week. And there's also this little button up top that says Activate Suction Pumps. And, well, It does exactly what you think it does. Just what I always wanted. Bug milk. Anyway, we do actually need this for the main puzzle in this section. But I'm not going to tell you what exactly we'll do with it just yet. For now, let's take a look at the third and final room splitting off from the main elevator shaft. Oh, give it a moment. Nobody panic, it just needs to load. There we go. These insects flying around are the swarm that was killing people in those PDA entries we sort of glossed over earlier. Now there's not a whole lot we can do. There are oxygen tanks in this room. They have that little shine effect on them. There's that spinning fan, there are some trees, there are some dead bodies scattered about. And we can't go too far into the room, otherwise this happens. So let's not do that. In fact, we should actually not be in that third room at all. We're going to go back to the Queen's Chamber. And if you thought one insect death was enough for this particular area, the game does not agree, because you're able to interact directly with the Queen, and if you do, this happens. And since I didn't mention it earlier, we're dealing with brain-affecting fungi and insects getting milked. So feel free to get your Last of Us and Futurama references out of the way on your own time. For now, we're going to this other computer, which we skipped over earlier, and this is the Vaporizer Mark V. Basically what it does is it'll take any matter that's put into it and then transfer the state of it. So like solid, gas, or liquid. It'll take one of those things, convert it to a different type of matter, and keep all of its original properties intact. At the bottom here, it specifically mentions taking the royal jelly and making it into a gas so it can be spread through the insects to placate them. And that is exactly what we have to do. If you try using the vaporizer, though, there's a slight problem.
Vaporizer chamber compromised. Chamber is not airtight.
Yeah, the chamber needs to be airtight, and there's that hole and the whole spider webbing glass cracks around it. Our main focus is fixing the hole. However, you can leave the milk here and just come back to it later. It's not going to disappear on you. But now we need something that can at least cover up that hole in the glass. And the metal plaque isn't going to do it, I can tell you that right away. So we're going to have to go back to the Queen Chamber. And the solution for this requires that you do something quite unusual. And no, it doesn't involve the milk. However, even after you put that on the vaporizer pad, you can still come back here and just grab another one. You don't have to. You can just do it. Now watch the Queen for a moment. You see that smiley face? That means that the Queen is docile and it's not going to try to eat you when you approach it. Now, as you might have guessed, we need to get some of that sticky tree amber to act as an adhesive to cover up the hole. But the hardened amber is too hard for us to get through, so how do we get through it? Well, watch the Queen. It sticks out its pincer as it becomes docile. So, we have to wait for it to do that again, and then we're going to interact with it, and this gets a little violent.
That was too close.
That took me a fair amount of time to figure out. But now we can use the Queen's pincer and dig through the hardened amber. Because nothing else we had, like the metal plaque or the empty pistol, that was not going to bash through all that amber. In fact, you know what? I'll show you real quick. So let's try going with the pistol.
It doesn't work like that.
Nope. And how about the metal plaque?
I can't see it working.
Not gonna work. Anyway, let's go ahead and do a little digging. We don't have to clear away all of the hardened amber. We just need to get a little opening in it so that some of the amber oozes out. And then we can just grab a handful of it and stick it in our inventory. That seems like a really bad idea, but it's perfectly fine here, I guess. So, let's head back to that room with the vaporizer chamber in it. Now, you can try just applying the tree sap directly, but the tree sap alone is not going to cover up the hole. So we're going to have to combine it with something else. Before I got the tree sap, I thought maybe I could just shove my personal data tag in there, but no, you're supposed to combine the tree sap with the thing that would most effectively plug the hole, which is the metal plaque. So now you have the metal plaque with sap, and you can just slap that on the side of the vaporizer chamber. And we should be good to go. So, milk is already on the vaporizer pad. The cracked glass is sealed off, hopefully. So, let's fire it up.
Vaporizer activated.
Alright, now instead of the milk, we have a container of, I believe it says queen pheromone. Yes, vaporized queen pheromone. If you remembered what that third room looked like, you can probably tell exactly where this is going. So we're going to head back to the insect swarm. And you might notice, top of the screen, there's a rather fast spinning fan. So, we're going to divert the insect swarm using the vaporized pheromone by tossing it into the fan.
I hate bugs.
That makes two of us, John. Anyway, the insect swarm is gone now, and we can proceed through this room to the adjacent rooms. However, before we do that, there are these oxygen containers spread throughout. They're actually collection tanks to collect all the oxygen the plants produce, but we're going to open them up a bit.
Oxygen levels increasing.
Duly noted. Anyway, we're going to go to the second oxygen collection tank and do the exact same thing.
Oxygen levels increasing to dangerous levels.
And there's one more oxygen tank a little further down, which we're also going to open up. I'm just doing this early to save us a little bit of time.
Oxygen levels pose a fire hazard. CSEC has been notified.
I'll get into this a little later, but the science behind what happens with the oxygen tanks, bullshit.
It's beautiful.
The oxygen garden's my favourite part of any ship. Green, full, natural.
Did you happen to catch that ghost as that little bit of dialogue was playing? That's not the first ghost we've seen either, so maybe there is something to what Akiza was mentioning in her personal data logs. Anyway, there are a couple more bodies strewn around here, some in more obvious places than others. However, there is a body here that's covered in vines. It actually mentions that the person covered in the vines is technically still alive, they're just unconscious. But when you clear away the vines, you'll find that they have a flare with them. Now I'd like to ask you something. We know that Dr. Gray was killed by the insects. We know that Akiza was taken over by the fungus. We know that most of the interns and stuff were either grabbed by the ghoulies, so to speak, or succumb to the insects. But what about Dr. Eleanor Way? What happened to her? This happened to her. If you don't recognize her right away, I understand.
Oh, God.
Oh no, I'm not talking about those bodies on the ground. I'm talking about the one that's standing up and still moving slightly. That's Dr. Eleanor Way, and she's been mostly consumed by that living fungus that we've read about. However, she is still technically alive. So, let's tread carefully and walk into the room, and we're not going to interact directly with her just yet. Instead, we're going to stick around a little bit and look at her PDA. I hope you're ready for Bible quotes because this PDA contains many of them. She has a daughter named Chelsea who works in the galley, and people are uncomfortable working around her because she's an ARG patient. ARG being a sort of genetic defect. She's otherwise fine, but they just don't like working around her because of that. She mentions some sort of shipment that she's being cut out of the loop on that people don't want her to know is coming in, but she finds out about anyway, and she also mentions that she's conflicted working for Kane because they do weapons research, but she's also looking to take their medical breakthroughs and then build upon them further. In fact, those breakthroughs are the reason that her daughter is alive. She has a meal with Dr. Gray, and he spills the beans about certain details of the shipment, which is related to Project Seed, something else that Dr. Way doesn't particularly like. She finds out that all of the legalities that shipments usually have to go through weren't done for this shipment. Finally, she discovers the terrible truth, which is they were children. The shipment was a bunch of children and adults who were illegally acquired, or sometimes just flat out kidnapped, to take part in these experiments. She decides that she's going to take Chelsea and leave the first opportunity she gets. However, all hell breaks loose. It soon reaches a point where she can hear the insects scuttling around in the vents, and people are screaming over the radio for help, but she ends up trapped in hydroponics and can't get to her daughter. The last entry here is a voice note because she can't move. The fungus has taken over her body. And not only that, her daughter is dead in front of her, and she was forced to watch as the fungus slowly consumed her body. Now the only thing she can do is hope that somebody comes along and puts her out of her misery. On a lighter note, she has a couple of emails, one of which is from Dr. Gray, who says she's being a little too inquisitive about that shipment, and that for the sake of her career, she should stop asking about it. And then there's another email from Akiza asking, basically, does she believe in ghosts? This is related to those sounds that she was hearing at night. But enough of the pleasantries. We should try talking to Eleanor over here.
I could get you out. I could cut you free.
Well, unfortunately, we have to kill her, because she's already well far gone. We're going to take that flare that we got earlier, and we're going to offer it to her, and again, I'm calling absolute bullshit on the science behind this. Just listen to this explanation.
I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna help you end this. But you need to help me first. I don't need you to leave. I need you to crack this flare. The oxygen will ignite. Then you will die.
temperatures detected. Plug suit has regulated body temperature to benchmark level.
The fire systems just went haywire over here, John. What did you do?
I cleared the vines.
With a flamethrower?
Something like that.
Fire in Oxygen Gardens 1, 3, 5, 6, 9. Fire in Oxygen Gardens 2, 7, 8. Fire suppression system activated. Warning. Fire suppression system compromised. Warning.
Shit! Oxygen production has been compromised. Are the biomes still intact? Oh God, please don't say burn them out.
Just the one on this level.
It's caused a chain reaction, John. They're all going up. We have a time limit now. Hours at most.
Get my daughter right now.
Here's my problem with this. Oxygen isn't flammable. You know what happens if you, say, hold up a lighter to a stream of concentrated oxygen? Nothing. Oxygen isn't flammable, it's an accelerant, which means that if you have a flame and you add oxygen to it, the flame is going to shrink, but it's going to burn brighter and hotter. That's why you'll see oxygen used for things like welding torches and blow torches. This scene just treats oxygen like it's a room full of natural gas, which would do something like this, but even if you're saying that the plants are catching fire and then it's... This scene just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. Oh, by the way, the elevator shaft's clear.
Little shit! What have you done?
Listen to me.
Fire cleanses. Mr. Marachek, I'm gonna make sure you burn for what you and your friends have done to me. To my own!
No, please. I have nothing to do with this.
You won't get much further. Goodbye.
Where is she, Tia? Where is Rebecca?
She's in a containment area at the other end of Seed.
And after all that, the ship just has a few hours of oxygen left, so we've got to find our daughter pronto. Next time on Stasis, can we find Rebecca in time?